Representative Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, House Bill 1303 is a bill about college and university tuitions. So why is this bill before us? One, because the cost of going to college is so high that many students are going further and further into debt. Two, there are two options for the colleges and universities: raise more money or operate more efficiently by cutting the fat. This bill returns the power of the cost to the student in the form of tuition back to the people, which is us. Prior to 1999, the legislature decided the tuition rates for students, so this is not a power grab. It might best be called an experiment. We delegated our authority to the Higher Education Roundtable. They raised the rates dramatically, and now we want our power back, and we have the power to do it. If you are in favor of efficiency and accountability, then you will vote for this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any discussion? Representative Dosh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. From the appropriation standpoint, one of perhaps the most frustrating parts that we deal with is that although we appropriate money to higher ed, we don't have control of what I feel is one of the most important aspects, and that is what the resulting tuition rates will be. Seems like no matter how much money we give them, what the tuition rates end up, we don't know. And nothing could be more evident than about 2 sessions ago, when during the appropriation process we appropriated money to higher ed. We were led to believe that tuition rates were going to be about 3.5%. And no sooner did we finish our work here than the president of NDSU comes flying back here in his private jet, meets with the State Board of Higher Ed, requests an 8.8% increase. The State Board of Higher Ed stamped it with their rubber stamp, and here we were. The legislature, I think, was held accountable on why tuition rates had gone up so much, and we really didn't have anything to do with that. And so, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, it's time that we prevented this from happening again. It's time for us to take control over setting tuition. It only makes logical sense. If we are expected to create balance between how much state dollars is used to fund education and what we expect our students to pay, we have to have control over both. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I respectfully ask a green vote on taking back control. Thank you.
Representative Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in answer to the last statement, or the last speaker's statement about NDSU coming to get an 8.6 or 8.8% increase in tuition, that did happen, and the board did approve it. But the next year, there was absolutely zero increase in tuition at that institution. That was, I don't know why they needed the money up front. They got it up front, they must have had a good reason. But I think it needs to be made clear that it will end up with a little over a 4% increase in the both years. There's lots of reasons. I happened to stop into appropriations, House appropriations, when some of the higher institutions of higher education were testifying, and they said, you do. The legislature does set our tuition. We have to make up the difference of what you appropriate and what it's costing on our campus. And that's one of the reasons that I voted for this, or against this, excuse me, is that I think they have to do what they have to do. We have a board that gives them approval to do it. If they can't meet their expenses, what do? They're going to lose their professors, some of their good staff, and I just think it's a bad idea that we try to take over totally. We do, in all essence, set what they have to pay, what the students have to pay because of what we appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ballou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the Assembly. I rise also to support this bill, and the reason why I support it is because it's in the Constitution, and I have a copy of the Constitution here. And it says, this is Article 8, the education section of Constitution. It says the Legislative Assembly shall provide for a uniform system of free public schools throughout the state, beginning with the primary and extending through all grades up to and including schools of higher education, except that the Legislative Assembly may authorize tuition, fees, and service charges to assist in the financing of public schools of higher education. Nowhere in our Constitution does it give the authority to the State Board of Higher Education. This is a legislative responsibility, and I think we need to take it back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hawken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a number of issues over the last several years with higher education. That's not a surprise to anybody sitting here. However, there were actions taken in each of the cases, and we seem to keep going back to things that happened 8 years ago, 7 years ago. There were consequences for actions that were not appropriate. None of those people that headed those institutions still have those jobs. The other piece that I just want to clarify is about the tuition increase at NDSU. I sat in the committee meeting and I listened to the chairman say to the president of NDSU, if you feel you can make a case for higher tuition increases, then that's your job. You are to fight for your school. That's what he did, and he's been in trouble for it ever since. We provide somewhere between 25 and 30% of the budget for our institutions of higher education. That's not a lot. I question if it's already in the Constitution, then we can already do it. Then this bill isn't necessary. So we probably need a clarification on that. But they do make up the difference with tuition and fees. That's not a secret. They talk about that. We've done studies on what the fees are. As a matter of fact, we've passed legislation saying they can't go up by more than a certain percentage. So we can control this and micromanage, but then I think we probably have to put more money into the budget. And I'm not sure there's anybody here that wants to do that.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Overson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the bill carrier yield to a question, please?
Representative Schatz, would you yield to a question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Overson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Schatz. In reading the bill and seeing that not only will we be setting the tuition rate, but also setting the fees rate, I'm wondering if you can tell me what that encompasses, if that's just mandatory fees or if that includes program fees, course fees, things like flight fees at UND, parking fees, things like that as well?
Yeah.
Representative Schatz.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Overton, we amended that part out, so fees are no longer part of the bill.
Representative Overson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I might just ask a question, then. The current bill form is not what I'm seeing on my hotkey, then, because it still says charge fees.
Representative Schatz.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I thought we voted on that, but apparently we did not, and I think I'm going to defer to my chairman and have him answer that question.
Representative Nathy.
Well, here's the.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We did amend out the fees. That was at the suggestion of Legislative Counsel. that that word is in there for any fees that are required by law, as far as I understand it.
Representative Mock?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. To answer the question posed by Representative Overson, this section of law deals with how the State Board of Higher Education were to, as you can read in the old language, we are overstriking on page 2, line 6, the word set tuition and fees, meaning that the State Board of Higher Education, prior to this bill, would set tuition and fees. What House Bill 1303 will do is to charge the tuition as set or as established by the Legislative Assembly, and then beginning on page 2, line 8, they would charge the fees subject to any statutory limitations. So the State Board of Higher Education would continue to charge the fees, but it would be subject to limitations that are spelled out in the next section of code that we passed in this Assembly last legislative session. That was the language that we had to include in this bill to ensure that the legislature would only set tuition and that the State Board of Higher Education could continue to charge the fees and not go beyond that 1% increase as a cap that we established last legislative session. I hope that explains the language on line 8. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Carlson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whenever you talk higher education, it seems to stir up the crowd a little bit in this place. But I want you to know that, and I'm not sure whether the 25 or 30% number of the total cost of education is correct or not. I'd have to look that up. But what I can tell you is in the last 3 bienniums, we have increased higher ed funding by 53%. At the same time, we have made the largest investment in our kids that we've ever made. The tuitions have continued to increase. That's why this bill is before us. Because we keep getting pounded about the fact that we're the cause of higher education being so expensive for kids. And hardly ever do we talk about efficiency or duplication of programs or transferability of credits. Those things get pushed off to the side, and it all becomes about money that the kids are paying too much. We have bills on free tuition. We have bills on freezing tuition. We have bills on all sorts of issues dealing with higher education. But constitutionally, our responsibility is what Representative Ballou said. We have to deal with the job that's given to us. We used to set tuition. It's not a new thing that we've done. The round table, which some of us have tried to square off the corners for a number of years, because we felt that we got half of the equation. It was flexibility with accountability. And we only seem to have gotten, in many cases, half of that situation. So I'm going to support this bill. I know it's going to face many roads to travel as their biennium goes forward and their budget comes out. But this chamber has made an extremely strong commitment to higher education. And we should never be criticized for that.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration House Bill 1303. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Key will be closed. The clerk will take the record. Final votes was 59 yea, 31 nay, 4 absent not voting. House Bill 1303 is declared passed. Continuing on the 11th order of business.